Welcome to the Kit Car History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marks of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff. A lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved, and what happened to them. Hi, my name's Steve Holt, editor of TKC Mag and TotalKitCar.com, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Total Kit Car History File series. Welcome again to the Total Kit Car YouTube channel. If you hear some funny noises tonight, I was sitting in the office. On this one, I was sitting in the office and it was like an oven in there, even though it's 7 o'clock in the evening in deepest East Sussex. And I often joke about sunny East Sussex, but it really is today. And I was boiling in the office, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and mix it with the blackbirds and all the other little critters that are singing out here at the moment. So forgive me if there's any sort of nature noises, so to speak. But welcome to another episode anyway, and I hope you've been enjoying the videos we've been putting out, covering the best of the British kit car industry's 75 years of existence. Again, if the sound quality is a bit ropey, that aside from the sound of nature, I don't really know what I'm doing with this sort of stuff, so forgive me. I bought a new microphone thing the other day, which is on the useless side of hopeless. I've just bought another one, so I'm hoping this might be a little bit better, but I need some help setting the little rig up. Rig, that sounds very very professional, doesn't it? So anyway, this time we're going to be looking at a company that was around and burnt brightly for about 7 years and then didn't. They're right at the pinnacle of the industry until they weren't. I'm also aware that these videos don't need to be too long, so I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. The company in question was called Unique Vehicle Accessories Company, UVA for short, best known as UVA, based in Newbury. But let's wind it all the way back. The man behind the company was a nice chap, a marketing professional, I would say, called Alan Arnold. Oh, there goes a plane into Gatwick. There we go. Oh, look at that, EasyJet, I think. Easy to get distracted. Yeah, where was I? Alan, a very nice bloke. He'd cut his teeth. I think he'd done some autocross in an old Austin A30 when he was a teenager. Outright ACSMC hill climb champion in 1970, and also won his class in his Lotus 7 a couple of years later. He then got into circuit racing, but his career was cut short. He told me about this. He had a massive accident at Brands Hatch when driving a Ferrari Dino, and he always reckoned that he was on the very lucky side to escaped unscathed from what was a nasty accident by the sound of it. He then took up a career in automotive marketing. Products under his control included, though big for the time, CBS brakes, Link Hansen car aerials. I remember them when I was a kid. My dad had one of their, was it a whip? Remember that? 10 foot long. In danger of taking people's eyes out walking down the pavement, I seem to remember, but he thought it was cool. And perhaps most notably, STP oil treatment. But he had a very, very keen interest in hot rods and indeed the Volkswagen Beetle scene, which would stand him in good stead when he set up UVA. He also built a custom, I think it was a Ford Transit, but he turned it into like a custom van that he called Super Van, which no, it's nothing to do with those Cosworth DFV super vans that Ford produced as publicity stunts all those years ago. This one was sponsored by CBS Brakes, strangely enough, and I remember that appearing in Custom Car magazine. In fact, I think I found the episode the other day. The issue the other day from 1972, where the car was on the front cover. Anyway, he tentatively set up UVA in 1981. Originally, the sole intention that Alan had was to import American VW tuning parts into the UK, which obviously in the States were massive and still are. And so his idea was to act as agents or importers for people such as, or companies such as Bugpack, Sway Away, and the mighty MP. I think what he was trying to achieve, he told me, and I'm talking 40 years ago nearly, was to create a grown-up version, if you will, of a hot rod speed shop type business. Initially, he based himself in his house, in fact, his double garage, in I think the place is called Courage, Curridge, in Hampshire. And I remember talking to his wife Lorna, a very nice lady, and she said those years were quite fraught, really. What she described, her lovely house was being taken over and literally awash with all manner of VW bits and pieces and boxes all over the place. They even employed 3 staff, even in those early days, to look after the stock and pack and dispatch the orders. They inevitably remortgaged their property and used all their savings really to get UVA up and going, because they could see it had promise. When Alan's friend, a guy called Terry Lee, came on board as co-director, things started really to, I think, the old cliche like blue touch paper and stand back. It sort of gathered pace when they had 2 of them sort of re-attacking the market. Alan was the king of marketing, and Terry very, very good on the technical side. I think German car dealers these days usually describe their kingpin, their top man in the workshop, as a master tech or something like that. Well, Terry was whatever the equivalent was back in the early 80s. I think he worked for a Mercedes-Benz dealership, so he was very hot with the spanners. He certainly, if he wasn't the boss of that service department, he was certainly the most knowledgeable technical person working there. I seem to recall there was a chap called Bill Badsey who produced a couple of, well, I think they were one-offs actually, but they were intended to be series production kits. One was called the Eagle, and for about 5 minutes before deciding to go a different route, I think Alan and Terry were actually agents for Bill Badsey's Eagle kit. But the thing they decided to do, which was probably the best thing for them at the time, was to visit California and do a deal with a company called Manta Cars, a kit car company in California called Manta Cars, to import what was then a very hot-selling Beetle-based kit called the Montage. Looked a bit like a McLaren M6. They sold a few of those, but they continued to really be washed, sort of overburdened with orders for the VW parts that they were bringing in. And around about that time as well, possibly the kit they're most, or the range of kits they're most known for, the bread and butter really, I suppose, was the Fugitive appeared. And there were several versions of that, but let's talk about the first one. In fact, let's talk about that very, very, very first kit, the UVA, the Baja Bug. They probably did about, well, Alan told me once about 115. So even if you said 100, that's not bad going. So they were busy with that. It was basically a Baja Beetle conversion for a Beetle. Popular sector in the industry, particularly in the US, and similar, I suppose, in the US to the UK's beach buggy craze 10 years earlier, although not quite on such a large scale. Even so, I remember Alan telling me they were doing 20 of those kits a month for a time, well, five months, but they went out like the proverbial hot baked goods. 7-piece GRP kit for a Beetle. That's what that was. But anyway, then we come on to their real bread and butter, of which they probably, it's called the Fugitive. Well, you might see it described as the Fugitive F20, the Fugitive 2. It had several names, but it was basically a 2-seat sandrail. And that again was inspired by more American fun and frolics. That was a Californian Baja Desert Racers. And UVA was a leading competitor and supporter of the SCOR, SCORR Championship in the UK in the 80s. And those vehicles were ideal for that. And they were road legal as well. Basically, I guess, an early exponent of the exo skeletal car, really, when you think about it. It had a bit more GRP than those, but certainly it was a chassis frame with a token 5-piece GRP panel set. UVA's one was very well built, and they do for the customer whatever you wanted, really. They'd even sort of build you a fully built car, or they would weld the complete rear torsion assembly onto your chassis from your donor. That could be quite tricky for a guy in his garage. Ideal donor to use was the 1300 twin port Super Beetle from, I think, in mid-70s, and because Alan said that had all the right and best parts on it. You didn't have to use a Beetle engine though, because Terry had designed it so mounts could be fabricated for various Ford engines, including Crossflow and CVH, I think, as well as now for Flat 4, or even a water-cooled VW engine. I think one from a Golf or Polo of the time. And then, confusingly, there were, I think, 5 variants of the F20 or the F2 or the F Roman numerals F11. The F2/1 was a racing version, 2-seater. In fact, they were all 2-seaters, I think. The F2/2 was a lightweight 2-seater. The F2/3 was a racing single. Oh, that was a single-seater, I think that one was. And that was purely off-road. And then you had the F2/4 lightweight single-seat off-road racer. In fact, I lied, there were 2 single-seaters. And then finally, the F2/5, which was a lightweight 2-seat off-roader, and that was aimed at the two-wheel drive club. Two-wheel drive class of the all-wheel drive club championship, I think. But whatever you look at that, however you look at that, they did 500 of those, definitely, all day long. Well, no, of course they didn't do all 500 in a day. That would be silly. But there was also the Fugitive F30. Only did 4 of those, and that was an in-betweeny, really. It was a logical evolution of the F20, and it featured a mid rather than rear-mounted engine, which were normally Rover V8 flavoured. And that had, we're going to come on to this in a minute, UVA's own front end conversion with a VW variant rear end. It was a bit of an in-betweeny, really, because I don't think there was a score class for it to race in. So it just didn't really take off, sadly, for them. Then there was a F40 or F4, which logically enough was a 4-seater version of the F20 that really was more like a 2+2. If anyone was taller than sort of Frankie Dettori, you would struggle to get in the back, unless you wanted your head to poke above the integral roll cage if you sat in the back of that car. Most people use the rear bench for luggage carrying anyway. So there was another, the pinnacle for me of the Fugitive range, but we'll come to that one in a minute because we're jumping slightly ahead of ourselves and we need to go back to the main story on it, really. And that was going back to the Manta. But around about this time, when the kit started selling as well, Lorna said enough was enough, and she wanted her home back, which I think was pretty fair enough, really. So Alan found the company a very swish 4,000 square foot glass fronted building on a new build industrial estate. I think they used to call them science parks in the mid-80s, didn't they, when they were flash glass fronted? And it was called Argent's Mere High Technology Park, and that was on the outskirts of Newbury in Berkshire. Very slick building. And it was a well set up operation. They always had demonstrators of all their models. I think Neil had put up one of the photos of something showing just that. The workshop, sorry, not the workshop, the showroom, the workshop in the distance, and I think about 3 or 4 demonstrators between them, between those 2 areas. So they were always very slick in the way they marketed themselves and presented themselves. More importantly, I mean, if you were going to kit car shows back in the day, you knew when you saw the UVA stand, it was very good. That was one of Alan's bugbears, but we'll come to that in a minute actually as well. So a very slick operation. Probably talking about Alan and his dislike for clutter. the UVA is probably responsible more than anyone else really for helping drag the standard of kit car show stands up a notch or three, I think, if you think about it. I think Alan upset a few people when he sort of told them how they should be presenting themselves. He did rub a few people up the wrong way, definitely. But he hated, he made no bones about it, he hated with a passion what he saw as tat. I think one kit car manufacturer of the day who's still around, who is never afraid to call a spade a sledgehammer. I won't name him. If you've been around for a while, you might be able to guess who it is. But he kind of accused Alan of being the self-appointed standards controller, which he didn't like. But others were thankful for the efforts that he made. Alan was definitely the reason why some of those very, very tacky and although classed as sexist, I suppose these days were what they were for the time. It was the way things were then. Really strange and outrageous strap lines on adverts and stuff. He certainly railed against that sort of outrageous kit car adverts that made ridiculous claims on them as well, which was interesting. Terry Lee's wife, Melanie, she joined, made it a real family affair, and she came along and she headed up UVA's in-house graphic design studio. Very, very grandly named, but that's exactly what it was, and they didn't just produce their own adverts. They always changed their adverts regularly, I seem to remember. Every magazine had a different one every month, and they had a different one for every magazine every month, if you know what I mean. Big advertisers. But they also produced stuff for other businesses around the Newbury area. I think from menus for restaurants to adverts for double glazing companies, that sort of thing. But as I said earlier, Alan really was a king of marketing. Very, very good at that, and a very good networker. Anyway, they sold a few montage kits before Terry Lee had got to work on it in the workshop to better suit the UK customers' needs and indeed UVA's requirements. And they came up with the UVA M6 GTR, which was more closely aligned to a McLaren M6. A rival for Tornado before they really got Andrew Sheldon got stuck into the brilliant GT40 that he still makes to this day. He and his father were producing, another Alan actually, were producing an M6 McLaren, and those two went right head to head for a while. But I remember when Alan, the day before Alan launched that, we were doing an action day at Mallory Park racing circuit. I think we're talking 1986 July, something like that. Not only did we, when I worked for Kit Cars and Specials, we sponsored the Castle Combe event, which was the one that most people remember. We also sponsored a couple, also run by Stephen Roberts, at Mallory Park, and a brilliant one at Knock Hill. Got a great story about that one, but that will say for another day. When they launched that car, the M6 GTR, at the British Motor Show, at the NEC, a famous racing driver, John Miles, was there to unveil it, I think, from memory. But I remember going back to what I said about meeting Alan in the car park of the hotel the night before he launched that car at Mallory Park Action Day. He was really proud of it. You could tell he was really, really buoyant about it. He was, yeah, as content as he could be. They did continue to sell the Beetle-based montage, but it kind of took a back seat once they brought the All Singing All Dancing M6 GTR out. But they'd always been keen to market their own UVA-produced kit car, and that indeed was the first fully UVA-produced kit. And they'd actually produced a supercar at a pocket money price when you think about it. Although their demonstrator and the recommended engine for that car was Rover V8, I think they had customers who fitted a VW Golf engine to one, Ford CVH, and probably, knowing Terry, where he offered various choices, others as well. Going back to their own range of parts, as well as selling stuff from MP and people and Bugpack and people like that, they also did their own fabricated range of parts, which were popular. They did UVA branded Beetle engine casings, which was a good seller. They imported, well, on that subject, they imported Kennedy Engineering's adapter plates, which allowed other engines to fit a Beetle gearbox. And possibly the best and most popular thing they did, they produced a conversion package which did away with the McPherson strut front ends. And that meant that customers could use 1302, 1303 Beetles as donors, which they'd been precluded from doing really, or with any ease really, up until that point. It had a very impressive rocker arm structure type arrangement, very race car like, but it was a good package and very popular. 1983, they were appointed as agents for VDO instruments, and also IHI turbochargers came on board. And Alan set up the British Off-Road Association, or he was involved with the setup of that, called BORA, BRRA, which brought a bit of extra credence to them, and of course healthy publicity. Alan and Terry would often, when there's something to test, they'd often regularly sort of head off to the nearby Ridgeway route, is it, or Green Lane route, on the outskirts of Newbury. In fact, here comes a little bit of trivia for you. You know I like a bit of trivia. I think the Ridgeway Green Lane route, or that particular track, is Britain's oldest road, I think. Anyway, whatever it was absolutely ideal for putting fugitives through their muddy paces. To continue his work as trying to eradicate what he saw as unacceptable behaviour of certain kit car companies, he didn't want the damage, any damage, to be sort of passed on to him and other slick operations. Didn't want to be tarred with their brush, in other words. He actively worked with the SMMT, and he set up or helped to set up the SCMG division within SMMT, which was Specialist Car Manufacturing Group. And others on that board of that sort of little group or subgroup was Graham Nern from Catering Cars. The Bora thing that he'd started was taking off. Obviously, marketing was at the forefront of what he did, and so the Fugitive was absolutely perfect for that. So that's where that comes in, and lots of Fugitives were sold because of that. Then we come to the pinnacle of the F33, the Fugitive range, and the F33 Can-Am. Only made 12 of them, I think. Should have done more. Possibly didn't really know its own identity, because it didn't know really what it was. But I know what it was. It was a complete bonkers scaffold tube structure with, well, very little GRP, in the way of GRP bodywork, and that certainly must have been one of the forerunners for the exoskeletal scene, some 12 years before the Aero Atom burst onto the scene. So it was based on a Fugitive F4 or F40 chassis, modified for a mid-engined Rover V8 fitment. Made jaws drop when it appeared in 1986, both on looks reasons and outrageous performance. Alan said it was for customers who didn't like the cycle style wings of the F30 or the F3, much preferring the flying up and over style, which the F33 had. It featured a twin wishbone front end and a full length under tray, and it was aimed at fast road as well as track use. Probably ahead of its time, as it probably, if you go to sort of now, it'd be an ideal track day weapon. It really would. It didn't weigh very much. They revamped it in 1988 and added 3 inches to the legroom and a couple of inches of extra headroom, because I think that was a complaint that when you had a crash helmet on, you'd struggle to get your head up without sort of banging your helmet on every time you hit a bump. And they also revised the front suspension. I think now, I've got to think about this one. I think a chap called Jonathan Saville responsible for the design of it. I wouldn't say bodywork, didn't have any. And I always remember two things about the F-33. Well, three really, because I keep coming back to the word bonkers. But I remember Terry taking me for a ride on its debut at might have been Castle Combe, that one, in September '86, I think, maybe. And it was a strap in, jump in, strap in, and hold on type thing. What a fantastic experience it was, and blisteringly quick. And I've never forgotten it. I always remember getting out of that after the ride, and I think it was Lorna, could have been Melanie, but Lorna, I think, who wondered, who was worried because I didn't look very well. In fact, I was quite queasy looking, and I did have to confess I went to the nearest toilet block on the infield at Castle Combe, and I was on the paddock at Castle Combe, and I was promptly sick. Nothing to do with the beers the night before, I promise, Governor. But such was the brutality of that ride. But what a ride! And then the other thing I remember about the F-33 was a year or so later, Alan let me have a drive of it to do a test for Kit Cars and Specials. And I remember, I think knowing me, it probably was a facetious question. I asked him if it had a heater before going off for a test drive. And it was a brutally cold February morning, which probably wasn't the best idea. And I always remember there are certain things in my career that have stuck in my mind that people have said to me over the years about cars and things. And the answer that Alan gave me while looking me dead in the eye was, yes, Steve, it's called adrenaline. And I've always loved that. I loved it then, and I love it now. But what a car. And no, it didn't have a heater. Anyway, moving on. And then they probably did, I think it was 15 M6 GTRs. It sounds like a bargain, but the starter kit cost £3,500, I think, in 1987, which is equivalent to about 6,700 today. They'd even build you a fully built Rover 3.9 V8 version for 21 grand, probably, which I think equates to 41,000 last time I checked. Other kits they did, there was a thing called the Shogun, made about 15 of those. That was basically a Beetle front. It was a Beetle donor really, with a Beetle front end, but from the door jambs back, the C-pillars, the body was replaced with an estate type section, like a van with windows. They'd intended to import an American kit called the Vendetta, but weren't happy with that, so they devised their own version of it. Definitely a rival, I suppose, of GP Project's LDV kit, and GP, by the way, were big rivals for UVA in certain other things they did, and the other big rival was Kingfisher Customs, the legend that is Dave Fisher, and those three drove each other on in the 80s kit car scene, and all of them were really busy as well. And then kind of UVA came to a halt, really, and very sadly. As I said, when I came in, their star burnt really brightly and then burnt itself out. I guess 6 or 7 years. I think they had 11 years of existence, but I think they were really big and busy for 6 or 7 of those years. They went into voluntary liquidation, I think, in 1991, and ex-Ford development engineer Gwyn Parry joined the company, at which time the name was changed to TAG, which I think stood for nothing simpler than Terry, Allen and Gwyn. Changed again to Laser Cars in 1992, which really was the end of the road, or the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, with just Terry Lee left after Alan had gone off to do other stuff, which I'll come to in a minute, and Parry departed. I didn't know Gwyn Parry, but Terry I always found to be a happy-go-lucky and a very talented man. But as I said, he left the customer-facing stuff very much to Alan, which is what Alan loved. Terry was happiest giving scary test drives or on the spanners. But a very good company for that time, and that particular 6 or 7 years was very successful for them, and I suppose coincided with the boom of kit cars in the mid 80s. It coincided with that, whether they drove that or whether they were in the right place at the right time to benefit from that, I don't know. I think Alan, I'm not sure what he did immediately after UVA. I do believe they had some sort of troubles. I think, with the company going into liquidation and such like. It couldn't have been a very easy time at all. But I know that by 1994 he joined a group that set up what was called, I think, the UK Shopping City, which was described as Europe's largest online marketing site. So an early tilt at, I suppose, eBay type thing, online auction or a sales portal. And they followed that a year later by a thing called TED, the European Directory, which I guess was an early Google search engine. Certainly both were ahead of their time and early, if you think about it. In sort of 1994, I don't think I had a computer until 1997. I think they sold both elements of the business anyway in 1998, which I guess was a year or three before the dot-com boom, but I hope they did all right out of that. Last heard of, Alan went back to sort of do some marketing work, and the last I heard, he was running a staff training company. If he's reading this, I'd welcome a chat with him. It's been a long time since we last spoke, and a lot of admiration for what he and Terry did. And there we have it. That's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed that one. I'm not sure how many people listening would even remember UVA. I guess that's one that I'm not sure about. 50% perhaps. But they were a really good operation for that period of time. Anyway, if you got this far and you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. Be greatly appreciated. We've just, at the time of I'm recording this, we're sort of on our way to well 1,200 subscribers, but I'd like to say 1,500, and that amazes me, and I'm incredibly grateful to the people that have subscribed. Although stats tell me that 70% who watch the videos don't subscribe. So if we could help me change that and just click that subscribe button, which is completely free, and then hit the notifications, so you'll know every time when we drop look at me with the technical terms, every time a new video is published or released, or whatever we call it in this world. And also, if you could hit the like button on the way out, that would be great. So wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day it is, thank you so much for visiting, and I look forward to welcoming you again next time. Thank you.